Joining us now at the table, Democratic Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey. She's a United States Navy veteran and a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congresswoman, it's good to see you again. I'm curious what you think of Kevin McCarthy's comments that if they come to power, if he is the Speaker of the House, that the blank check, as he called it, will be gone to Ukraine, that funding may be pulled back, reduced, maybe eliminated altogether. What's your reaction to that?
It just, to me, shows the growing cynicism within the Republican Party. Here is somebody who purportedly wants to be in leadership in the Republican Party and yet is not there to serve the American people, not there to promote our values, but rather is just working on his own personal power within his conference, kind of taking a dive to the right with the Freedom Caucus, saying he's not going to fund Ukraine, he's cutting Social Security and Medicare, and to do so, he's going to hold the debt ceiling hostage. We know what that looks like from 2011. Moody's says that could cost us 6 million jobs in this country. You know, this is not someone who's thinking about how he's going to govern for America. He's thinking about how he's going to gain personal power.
There are people in this country, and you watch certain media outlets, who say, we've been funding this war for 8 months. How long are we going to continue to do that? You sit on armed services. You serve the United States Navy. From your point of view, what is the case to continue supporting Ukraine?
So the United States is the preeminent democracy in the world. We're the standard bearer. And quite frankly, if you kind of missed your civics class in elementary school, I can tell you why those values are so important, as we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of establishment, all the things that so many people here sometimes take for granted and can take for granted because they're protected. And that's what we promote across the world. And if you don't think that that's important, if that is not what is driving you as an American citizen, then what about the fact that we also do quite well economically with our friends and allies across the world? And that's who we're gathering here to promote democratic values and then also to promote a world where we have influence over the economy, where when we're talking about the rules of the road for 5G, it's not China setting the rules of the road, it's the United States and our allies setting the rules of the road.
So, Congresswoman, as we speak this morning in Kherson, in the area, there's an abduction going on. The Russians are actually kidnapping citizens and moving them into various other parts of Ukraine. And you mentioned our allies. It's going to be a cold winter in Europe, in Germany and in France, gripped by inflation and now gripped by a lack of energy, a lack of fuel for the winter. Do you worry at all about the allies, NATO's continued commitment, given the struggles that they're going to have this winter in the fight against communism, against Russia?
You know, what was so interesting to me and why I deeply felt and continue to feel that Putin has miscalculated this war at every single step was the fact that before I went to Ukraine, right before the war, I went to Brussels and we met with our NATO allies and we saw the cohesion and how much they wanted to make sure that Russia was not free to simply invade sovereign territory across Europe, take over areas, and make sure that they were promoting freedom and democracy together with the United States. And that they have not wavered. In fact, they've continued their support against Russia at a great deal of harm to themselves, you know, when you're looking at the future, when you're looking at their economies. But I think because they are so close, they are so close to what's going on. They see so clearly what could happen if Putin's allowed to go unchecked. And they've lived through it. And so they're there for the fight.
Well, we try to have and aspire to have a bipartisan foreign policy where the decisions we make are reflective of our national interest and separated from American politics. But Kevin McCarthy's comments illustrate what a hot political issue this is with Republican voters who are pretty divided. On the one hand, who say, hey, we've done $18 billion. Why don't we stop? Why is this important? And then you have the more national security minded Republican voters. What are you hearing from behind closed doors from your Republican colleagues about how they see what's happening in Ukraine and countering Russia's aggression as in the national interest?
Well, that's a really interesting question because you see the same kind of divides behind closed doors that you see kind of out in front between, say, Pence and McCarthy. You hear Republicans, and I sit on the Four Country Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of veterans. So there are a lot of people who've served, who believe deeply in our national security priorities, who believe deeply in protecting democracy around the world. And then you see others who sort of have this idea of a very insular America, not connected to the world, which, you know, I think we've seen can be very, very bad for our economy and our values. So you see those same kind of fights. In fact, I was behind closed doors and we were talking about protecting our election system against foreign influence, generally Russia, Iran, China, and protecting our elections. And one of my Republican colleagues said, "Why is this such a priority?" To which several of us were just sort of like, gosh, it's sort of like asking, why is the sky blue? Explain that to me. I mean, why is it a priority to protect our democratic elections against foreign influence? It's kind of jaw-dropping. You know, there's almost no answer. I think everyone just kind of paused, looked at him and said, well, that's our priority.
Yeah, so challenges certainly at home. We know that Russia is campaigning right now. It's a campaign of terror against Ukrainian citizens, trying to target civilian infrastructure, power grids, and so on, using drones supplied by Iran. So what does that tell you about Putin's arsenal? Is it running out? But B, what can be done right now about Tehran funneling these weapons that allows him to prolong this campaign of terror?
Wow, it's really been a very interesting kind of shifting alliances throughout the region. So certainly the Iranian drones, I think, really brought Israel more into alignment with the United States in this fight, and they've been talking about how they're going to support some air defense systems and advise and support the Ukrainians on their air defense systems and early warning systems. I think you're seeing the Russian arsenal really greatly depleted. Now, as you're seeing those conscripts getting to the front, they're arriving in old helmets, old gear, old tanks, things that were used in the Soviet-Afghanistan war. So really decrepit pieces of equipment. They're getting drones, as you said, from Iran. And then you see this realignment despite Iran's work there. And we have reports that the National Guard, the Iranian National Guard, is in Crimea. You see these reports now. And yet Saudi has aligned itself with Russia through OPEC in cutting off some of the oil production. So it's really interesting. And I think, again, so much of this to me feels like we are operating in this very short-term world. You know, many people have called Russia, for example, a gas station with nuclear weapons. And yet they have engaged in this war, which I think is going to do real and long-term harm for their economy. I just worked on the National Defense Authorization Act, where we're talking about creating energy independence from places like Russia. You're seeing Saudi Arabia, another economy highly dependent on gas and oil, and yet kind of messing around with the global oil supply in a way that is going to, I think, speed up nations into moving away from reliance on these sources of energy.
A little bit closer to home, talk about your race for re-election. We've been talking this morning broadly about some of the issues nationally that are on the minds of voters. Abortion is one, crime is another one, inflation, the economy are the top issue. What are you hearing in your district when you go out and talk to your constituents? What are they most worried about right now?
It is, I think you were saying earlier, a time of anxiety. And so many fronts. And so we're talking about issues related to what are my gas prices going to be? What are my grocery prices going to be? Can I send my daughter to a state that doesn't promote reproductive rights? If I'm a pregnant woman, can I dare venture out of my state, if you're in New Jersey, to a place like Texas, where a woman recently almost died because of a staph infection simply because she was having an untreated miscarriage? They would not treat her miscarriage. So you're looking at people balancing all of these things. And again, I keep looking to the Republican Party and seeing this, I can only describe it as this deep cynicism. When you have someone like Herschel Walker, who shares none of the values that Republicans purport to have, and yet simply will evidently, they think, be just a blind vote in favor of whatever priority they put in front of them. This isn't how a democracy works, where you have an elected official that you rely on to share your values and priorities and go fight for you in Washington. And I really do think voters are aware of that. My own opponent said he's in favor of Roe being overturned. He's in favor of states being able to ban abortions, no exceptions. And then he just says, with no support, that he's pro-choice. There is just this deep, deep cynicism.
Yeah, and in some of those candidates, Herschel Walker, though, running neck and neck and maybe in positions of power very soon. Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill of New Jersey, you're very classy not to bring up the Ridgewood Montclair game last Friday night.
I was thinking it, though.
It was a heartbreaker for the Maroons, but congratulations to the Mounties.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
to see
Willie.
you, Congresswoman. Joe?